Hey friend, I'm glad you're here tonight. Before we begin, I just want to thank you for stopping by. If this kind of storytelling helps you drift off, or if you just enjoy these slow journeys into forgotten history, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It means more than you know. And before you get too comfortable, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Which city, which country, and what time is it right now? Is it just after midnight? Or maybe 3 a.m., when the rest of the world is quiet and you finally get a moment to breathe? Let me know in the comments. I always read them, and I love seeing how far this little story travels. Now, close your eyes if you want. You don't need to focus. You don't need to memorize. Just let the words take you somewhere else. Somewhere cold, somewhere rough, somewhere medieval. They say you wouldn't last a day. That phrase has become a joke, now one we say, when people complain about missing Wi-Fi or having to do chores by hand. But in this case, they're not wrong. You wouldn't, not even close. If you opened your eyes one morning and found yourself standing in the mud-slick street of a medieval town, you'd think it was a nightmare. And in a way, it is. The air is thick, not with fog, but with the smoke of wet wood and human breath. It smells like ash, manure, rot, and something older than any sanitation system. You cough, it hurts. The inside of your nose burns. You try to step forward, but the ground isn't solid. It's a soup of dirt, animal droppings, and things you don't want to name. Your shoes, if you're wearing any, are already soaked. A cart rattles past. The wheels creak like bones. Flies hover in clouds. No one stops for you. No one even looks. You don't matter here, not yet, not ever. You turn and nearly bump into a woman carrying a basket of entrails. She grunts. You stammer something, but your words don't make sense to her. You're speaking a language that hasn't been invented yet. Modern English? It's gibberish to her. Even if you learned Old English, it wouldn't help here. Dialects shift by village, by class, by hour. You're not just lost in time, you're mute. You try to walk, to find something familiar, but there is nothing. No signage, no clock. Just timber buildings leaning against each other like tired shoulders. Their windows are holes covered with animal skin. Their roofs are thatched, the kind of thatch that catches fire if someone sneezes too close with a torch. You feel eyes on you, suspicious, calculating. You don't belong here, and they know it. Strangers are rarely good news in these times. They bring debt. They bring disease, or worse, they bring change. And nobody wants that. You move faster, hoping to find safety. But where? The tavern? The church? You think of movies, of stories, of heroic knights and bustling markets. But the reality is different. The tavern is a shack with stale ale and floorboards sticky from centuries of spilled misery. The church is locked unless there's a sermon or a funeral, and the market? It's not a colorful place of exchange, it's a pit. A trench of bodies yelling, animals screaming, children crying, and meat rotting under the open sun. You cover your nose, but it doesn't help. The smell isn't just in the air, it's in your mouth, on your skin. You are inside the Middle Ages now, and your body already wants out. You try to think, try to find logic. Where could you go? Who could help? But the truth is, there is no help. Not for you. You are alone. You are penniless. You have no papers, no family name, no trade. You don't even know the rules. And in this world, rules aren't printed, they're enforced. Not by law, but by habit, by tradition, by suspicion. You walk too quickly? Suspicious. You ask too many questions? Suspicious. You don't bow when the local lord rides by? Dangerous. You could be taken for a spy, a heretic, a witch, or worse, an outsider with no patron, no one to vouch for you. And in this world, that's a death sentence. Your stomach growls. You haven't eaten. You glance at a bread cart, but the bread is black, hard as stone and crawling with bugs. Still, people buy it. It's all they can afford. You reach for a crumb. Someone slaps your hand. You almost cry out, but catch yourself. Emotions are weakness here. No one cares how you feel. Not the woman breastfeeding her third child in the mud. Not the man missing half his teeth trying to sell you spoiled fish. Not the beggar lying face down near the dung pile. You realize suddenly, sharply, that this is normal. That suffering is not an interruption of life here. It is life. You stumble away, heart racing. A bell rings. Loud. Dull. It echoes down the stone corridors like a funeral drum. People start moving, fast. A priest steps into the square and begins shouting in Latin. You don't understand a word. But others kneel. You kneel too. Copy them. Blend in. Don't draw attention. That's the only rule that matters. The priest shouts a bless. Sing, then a warning. Something about sin, about punishment, about fire. The crowd mutters, Amen. A boy beside you scratches his scalp until it bleeds. Lice. Everywhere. You feel your skin crawl. Literally. Something is biting you. Maybe a flea, maybe worse. You shake it off, but it doesn't help. The problem is not the bug. It's the century. When the crowd disperses, you try to follow. You have no plan. You're just trying to survive the next hour. You pass a group of children playing with a dead rat. One waves it like a trophy. Another holds a stick, pretending it's a sword. Their faces are smeared with dirt. One girl has a necklace made of bones. You don't ask what kind. Further on, a man is being whipped. Public punishment. His crime? He'll never know. Maybe he stole. Maybe he prayed wrong. Maybe he just annoyed someone richer. Doesn't matter. The crowd laughs. They always do. Pain is entertainment when everything else is hunger. Your body begins to ache. From standing. From walking. From the sheer weight of time pressing down on you. Your shoes are gone, torn. You don't remember when. Your feet bleed. No one notices. You lean against a wall and feel it give slightly. The building is made of wattle and daub sticks and mud. It smells like mold and unwashed clothes. You close your eyes, hoping for a moment of peace. But there is no peace here. A rooster crows too close. A woman screams in childbirth. Somewhere, someone is dying, and no one is stopping it. And you remember something horrible. The thing no one says out loud in those history classes. You remember that this isn't wartime. It's not a plague. It's not a bad year. This is ordinary. This is Tuesday in the Middle Ages. And you are just one heartbeat away from being forgotten by history. One slip, one wrong look, one step too far from a known face, and you vanish. Buried in unmarked ground. No stone, no prayer. Just another body in a time that doesn't have time to care. You are not sure how long you've been walking now, but the road hasn't changed. And neither have the faces suspicious, tired, pale beneath layers of grime and resignation, moving not with purpose but with the dull rhythm of survival. And you begin to realize something else. Something colder than the morning fog that never quite lifts from between the damp rooftops. No one here has any expectations beyond enduring the day. No one hopes for comfort. No one dreams of safety. Because in this world, to live is to be prepared for pain. And to expect anything less is foolishness, dangerous foolishness, the kind that gets you accused of arrogance or heresy or worse. And the longer you breathe this air, the more it sinks into your chest, the more your mind begins to dull with it. Until the horror is no longer the filth or the hunger or the screaming, but how quickly it starts to feel normal. How quickly your own silence becomes survival. How you stop flinching at the cries of a woman being dragged by the arm to the pillory for something she may or may not have said about her landlord. How your eyes stop widening when you see blood on the cobblestones. Or a child collapsed in a doorway. Motionless. Blank-eyed. Barely noticed by passers-by. Because suffering here is not exceptional. It is expected. It is structured. It is part of the walls and the wages and the worship, and you understand now why no one looks up when the bell rings? Because it only ever brings more labor or more punishment or more death, and you feel yourself shrinking, not physically but spiritually, curling inward like a leaf in frost, a defense against the sharpness of everything around you. Because nothing here is soft, Not the ground, not the bread, not the voices, not even the wind that slices through the gaps in your tattered cloak like it wants to remind you that even the air is hostile, that even the sky is not neutral. And when night begins to fall, you realize with a sick sort of dread that there is no refuge waiting, no warm inn, no safe bed, because everything closes with the sun and nothing opens until prayer, and the space in between belongs to the shadows and the cold and the things people don't talk about, the things that walk without torches, the sounds that crawl beneath doors, the figures you glimpse at the edge of the village fields, half covered in burlap and muttering to the wind, and you think about sleep, but you can't afford it. Not here. Not yet. Not when you don't know who or what might find you while your eyes are closed. So instead you sit beneath the eaves of an abandoned cart, knees to chest, arms wrapped tight around yourself like you can squeeze the warmth back into your bones. But it doesn't work, because there's no warmth left in you, only ache and fear and a strange numbness that settles behind your eyes like soot. And in that moment, you begin to understand the people here in a way you didn't before, not just intellectually, but viscerally. Because you see now why they are so still, so suspicious, so quiet they are tired, not just in body but in soul. Tired in a way you didn't know was possible. The kind of tired that seeps into generations, passed like heirlooms. The kind of tired that teaches a mother not to cry when her son dies of fever, but to count the days until she has to bury the next one. The kind that makes fathers drink instead of pray, that makes priests hoard their bread instead of share it. And you think about running, about escaping. But the truth slams into you like ice water. There is nowhere to run. Because this is not a prison with walls and gates. It is a time, a world, a system, and there is no door out, only forward. And forward here means more of the same, more dirt, more silence, more invisible rules that snap shut like traps when you forget to bow or kneel or cross yourself at the right moment. And the worst part is, even if you survived the day, even if you made it to morning, what then? Another day just like this one, and the next, and the next, until your name is forgotten, or your body gives out, or you are married off, or conscripted, or taken for something you didn't do, and punished in ways you don't yet understand, but will soon enough. And this knowledge, this awful unblinking truth, begins to dig into your ribs deeper than hunger, deeper than cold, and you want to scream, but your throat has closed up with dust and fatigue and fear, and you realize something else: the people here never scream, not because they are brave, but because they have learned that screaming means nothing, that no one listens, that the world keeps turning, that pain is background noise, and the silence is not peace but permission. And you fall asleep without meaning to, head slumped forward, body curled like a comma, and you dream not of home or warmth or safety, but of rats in the walls, of blood in the well, of teeth cracking on stones baked into bread. And when you wake, the sun is rising again, and the bells are already ringing. And someone kicks you in the ribs and says something you don't understand, and you stand, because it's safer to move than to stay still, and you follow the stream of bodies down the path that leads to the fields, because even strangers are pressed into service, and no one cares where you came from as long as you work. And you work, digging, lifting, dragging stones from one place to another, meaningless labor with no explanation and no reward. And when your hands bleed and your back screams and you collapse from the weight, someone else steps over you, and the work continues. And when the priest rides by to bless the harvest, you are expected to bow, even if you can't lift your head. And when you don't, you are struck with the handle of a rake and told to thank God for the reminder. And you do, because it's what's expected. And as the day drags on, the sun burns the tips of your ears and the flies nest in the corners of your eyes, and you wonder if this is it. If this is what life really was: mud, hunger, silence, obedience, and the slow disintegration of everything soft inside you. And you think again about the stories you were told, about knights and castles and honor, but you see now that those stories were for the very few. And even then, they were mostly lies, because honor means nothing when your belly is empty and your children are dying, and the Lord who owns your land also owns your future, and there is no recourse, no law that protects you, no appeal, just power, and those who have it and those who don't, and you don't, and you never will, not here, not now. And when you return to the village at dusk, dragging your feet through the mud that now feels like part of your own skin, you hear the cries of someone being taken from their home, accused of theft or sorcery or dissent. It doesn't matter which, the punishment will be the same: shame, pain, and maybe death if they are lucky. And you want to look away, but you don't, because you need to remember this. You need to understand that survival here is not just hard. It is brutal, it is grinding. It is a machine that chews through lives and forgets their names. And when you finally collapse again beneath the same cart, you don't cry, because you don't have the water left in your body to spare, and you close your eyes, and you whisper a prayer you don't believe. Because maybe, just maybe, something is listening, and if it is, you beg it for the strength to see one more sunrise. You wake with your mouth dry and your spine aching from the cold stone beneath you, and for a brief moment you don't remember where or when you are. But then the sound of hooves against cobblestones snaps you back. The smell of smoke and dung fills your nose, and you know you're still here, still trapped in the dark belly of the Middle Ages, and the sun hasn't even risen yet. But people are already moving, already coughing, shouting, dragging, lifting, existing like shadows, and you rise with them not because you want to, but because you've rend what happens to those who don't, and your legs feel like wood, your feet blistered raw, your breath tight in your chest like it doesn't belong to you anymore, and no one looks at you, no one speaks your name. Because you don't have one. Not here. Not now. You are just a shape, a pair of hands, another body in the crowd. And the moment you forget that, the world reminds you with a shove, a slap, a silence that cuts deeper than any blade, and you follow the others toward the square where the work is handed out, though no one says it like that. Because here work is not a gift. It is a sentence, a weight, a ritual you perform to prove you belong, and if you can't carry your share, you are cast aside. Or worse, blamed for something small, something invented, something vague like disrespect or idleness or having a strange look in your eye. And you stand in line as the steward points to each person, assigning them their burden for the day. Dig this trench, haul that wood, clean this latrine, slaughter that pig, and when he gets to you, he hesitates, his eyes narrowing, and then he says, "You graveyard," and your blood runs cold. Because even in this place where nothing is clean, nothing is kind, the graveyard is a place people avoid. A place where the air hangs heavier, thicker, where the ground seems to shift beneath your feet, and names are erased by rain before anyone remembers them. But you nod, because what else can you do? And you take the rusty shovel you're handed and you walk behind the chapel, past the leaning stones and the crooked crosses and the open earth that breathes cold into your skin. And you see the hole waiting for you, half dug, wet with last night's rain, and you understand your task. Finish it fast before the cart arrives. And so you begin, muscles burning, hands already blistering. Because the ground here is not soft, not kind. It's filled with roots, with rocks, with bones you can't look at too long, and the wind whistles through the trees like it's whispering names you don't want to know. And behind you, the chapel bell rings once, a long, low sound that means someone's died again, and sure enough, you hear the wheels of the death cart before you see them, the creak of wood, the squelch of mud, the crows already circling, and when the cart stops, you turn, and the body they unload is small, too small, and you look away. You have to. Because even in this world where death is common, children should not be part of it. And the priest gives a prayer, rushed, careless, words you barely catch. Something about mercy, something about rest. but it sounds like noise, like obligation, and the body is lowered, and you begin to cover it, shoveling damp earth over fabric that's too thin for warmth, and when it's done, no one stays, not even the family, if there is one, and you are alone again, just you and the stones and the dead, and for a long time you stand there, frozen, shovel hanging limp at your side, because something in you has cracked, not broken, not yet, but cracked, and you feel the cold inside the crack, the way it spreads, slow and steady, like the chill of a fever that hasn't been named yet, and you know that if you let it, it will take you whole. So you move, back toward the village, back into the noise and the smoke and the sour smell of boiled cabbage, and you tell yourself it's just another day, just another task, but something inside you disagrees, and it speaks in your bones, in your heartbeat, in the way your hands tremble when no one's looking. And when you pass the well, a woman spits on the ground and mutters something under her breath. Curse maybe? Or stranger? Or both, and you realize she's talking about you, because word has gotten around that you don't have a patron, don't have kin, don't have a trade, and that makes you suspicious, that makes you expendable, and worse, that makes you convenient, because when something goes wrong, when the milk sours, or the crops fail, or a child takes sick, people need someone to blame. And people like you, rootless, voiceless, strange, are easy to point at, easy to punish, and you feel the first whisper of fear. That's not just fear of pain, but fear of being noticed. Because being noticed in this place is never good. And you remember the man they burned last week, the one who spoke too loudly about the price of flour, who said the Lord's men were stealing, and they said he was mad or cursed or touched by the devil, and they didn't even let him speak at his own trial, just tied him to the stake and lit the kindling, and the whole village watched, not because they hated him, but because they were relieved it wasn't them, and you stood there too, silent, still, pretending you didn't smell the smoke in your clothes afterward, pretending you didn't see the way his eyes found yours through the flames, and now that memory lives behind your eyelids, waiting for the moment you try to sleep, and tonight will be no different, because already your limbs ache, already your eyes sting, already your soul feels scraped raw by the 1,000 quiet cruelties that pass for routine here. And when the sun begins to lower again, when the bells ring vespers, and the pigs are herded back, and the doors are bolted and the prayers begin, you find yourself sitting at the edge of the field, staring at your own hands, wondering whose they are, because they are filthy, cracked, red from cold and work, and they do not look like yours. They look like they belong to someone else, someone who lives here, who always lived here, and you feel the line between yourself and this world blur again, and that frightens you more than anything, because once you forget who you were, once you forget the time you came from, the life you had, the rules you knew, you will become one of them, not accepted, not trusted, but consumed, swallowed by the rhythm of this place, and there will be no coming back. And so you whisper your name to yourself, your real name, the one no one here knows, the one you haven't spoken aloud in days. And it sounds strange now, thin and distant and useless, like the echo of a song that's already ended. But you hold on to it anyway, like a charm, like a thread, because it's all you have. And when night falls and the chill sinks deep into your bones again, you find the same corner beneath the cart, curl your body into the same shape, and wait not for sleep, not for morning, but for the part of you that still remembers light, that still believes in warmth, to whisper back. There is a moment just before sunrise, so faint, so small, that most people here never notice it. A breath caught between dark and light. A pause before the world begins its daily churn of noise and mud and blood and shouting. But you do. You feel it. That cold stillness pressing against your face like the ghost of something that used to be called peace. You rise slowly from beneath the cart where you've spent the night. Your limbs are stiff, your back heavy. There is no sharp ache, only the kind of weariness that never quite leaves. Frost clings to the wooden wheel beside you, glinting faintly in the pale morning. For a brief second, it almost looks gentle, but it isn't. It's cold. And here, cold isn't something poetic. It's a reminder, subtle but constant, that comfort is not meant for everyone. You stand because you must, not because someone told you, but because everything around you expects it. The village breathes with quiet purpose, and you are part of that breath now. You don't stand out. You don't belong to yourself. You are simply needed, like a brick or a nail. Someone passes by, a man with a basket and a slight limp. He doesn't notice you. No one ever does. You start walking toward the square. You don't plan the steps. They just happen. Today, someone gestures toward the tannery. You pause, just for a moment, before moving. That pause was too much. Here, pausing means remembering, and remembering is dangerous. The tannery is not like other places. It's harder. The air is thicker. You head past the blacksmith, his hammer already working past the mill, and the rows of homes wrapped in morning haze. As you near the river, the air changes. It carries a weight. You didn't expect it to be pleasant, but still something in your chest tightens. The mist rising from the pits curls upward like smoke without fire. The ground is damp, the walls darkened. Nearby, materials are stacked neatly. Someone points. To a tool. To a bucket. You begin. That's all. No instruction, just motion. Your hands dip into a mixture that stings faintly. Not fire, but a kind of sting that lingers. You press, pull, scrape. There's a rhythm to it. The air clings to your skin. You focus only on the next step. Time moves strangely. At some point, a girl arrives, maybe 9 years old. She says nothing, drops more material beside you and leaves. Her eyes are quiet. Yours are too. You want to speak, but your throat is dry. So you don't. You continue, one task into another. You don't feel the difference anymore between 1 hour and the next. When the bell rings, you stay where you are. Others go to eat. You sit by the edge of the river. You aren't hungry. Not because you're full, but because food doesn't seem real anymore. You look at your hands. They smell like work. Your clothes carry the day. You exhale slowly, and something inside you moves. A thought, a feeling, a note of a song, perhaps imagined. You hum just once. It almost feels warm. You stop. Better not. You stand again and walk away. Toward the far edge of the village, near the animals. You sleep there tonight. Not because it's better, but because no one will disturb you there. And maybe, just maybe, because the quiet warmth nearby reminds you of something soft. The earth is wet, you lie down, curl inward, close your eyes. You think of the sky, of stars that once looked bright and near. And before you know it, sleep finds you not because you're tired, but because everything else has stopped. You dream, nothing clear, just warmth, laughter, colors. A name you haven't heard in a long time. Morning returns. One of the animals beside you no longer moves. You don't ask. The farmer sees you, says nothing. You rise. You go back. Same road, same place, same task. The girl returns. You don't speak. She doesn't either. Another day begins, and you begin to understand something simple. Life here isn't divided into comfort and discomfort. It just is. Cold doesn't arrive, it stays. Hunger doesn't surprise, it belongs. You adapt. You follow the rules. No sudden words. No quick bites. No questions. No laughter. If someone is quiet, you let them be. If someone looks down, you look down too. You do what's needed. You stay present. You wait. Obey. And one morning, when the steward hands out tasks, he passes you over. You wait, but he doesn't speak your name. You don't ask. You just stand there. Useless. Unnamed. Forgotten. And in that moment, something strange happens. You feel relief. No work means rest, but also fear. No work means suspicion. You walk the village without direction. You avoid the chapel, the well, the market. You end up near the gallows. There is no one there, just the wood. and the rope, and the flies. You sit. Not because it's safe, but because it's quiet. And in the silence, you remember your real name. You whisper it, once, twice. And suddenly, you cry. Not loudly, not beautifully. Just tears. Hot, silent, constant. And when they stop, you stand. You wipe your face. You walk back to the center of the village. You find the steward. You speak clearly, quietly. I will take any task. He looks at you for the first time and nods. The latrines, he says, all of them. You nod, and you go. Because this is not about pride or survival or even hope. It is about motion, about continuing. Because to stop here is to die. And to die here is to vanish. The latrines are not what you imagined. You thought they'd be outhouses. Small, wooden, crude but manageable. But you were wrong. They are pits. Open trenches behind the livestock pens, behind the tannery, behind the silence of the village. The kind of places people don't talk about, don't look at, don't visit unless they have no choice. And you today have no choice. The steward gives you a wooden plank, a bucket of ash, and a long-handled ladle with the handle worn smooth from too many years in too many hands. He doesn't give instructions. He doesn't need to. The job is simple. Keep it from overflowing. Keep it from smelling worse than it already does. Keep it from becoming a reason for plague. You nod. You do not speak, because the smell is already in your throat, already behind your eyes, already coating the inside of your skull. You walk to the first trench. It is not empty. It is not new. The contents bubble and shift like something alive. You cover your mouth with your sleeve, but it doesn't help. You use the ladle. Scoop, pour, ash, repeat. Scoop, pour, ash, repeat. The sun rises, but you don't feel it. The light doesn't warm you. The air doesn't move. You are still, bent, breathing through your teeth, trying not to think, trying not to feel, and above all, trying not to remember. Not remember who you were, what your hands once touched, what food used to taste like, what air used to smell like, because remembering now is dangerous. Remembering will undo you, so you don't. You focus on the rhythm. Scoop, pour, ash, repeat. You do this for hours, until your back becomes something separate from you, until your knees feel like stone, until the pit is acceptable, not clean, never clean, just less offensive. You move to the next one, then the next, then the next. A woman walks by. She looks at you, not with pity, not with cruelty, just looks. And then she moves on. That's when you understand this is who you are now. The latrine worker. The one who shovels what everyone else pretends doesn't exist. You are not hated. You are not loved. You are background, essential, forgotten. And that, oddly, is safer than anything else. You finish before sunset. Just barely. You pour the last of the ash into the final trench, and your body sags, but you don't let it fall, because you still have to walk. Still have to get out of sight before the bells ring. Still have to find your place in the dark. You head toward the back of the granary tonight? You've slept there before. It's dry. Mostly. The rats are predictable, and no one bothers you. You curl against the stone, pulling your cloak tighter. It still smells of the tannery, of waste, of everything you've touched. But you don't flinch anymore. You've stopped reacting. You've stopped resisting. Your body just adjusts. As you drift, half asleep, a sound catches your ear. Laughter. Real. Unfiltered. A group of children somewhere close telling stories. One of them mentions the devil. Another whispers about a man who turned into a wolf. And they laugh. You listen, not because you believe them, but because the sound of joy, even small and foolish, is something you haven't heard in days, maybe weeks. And it reminds you of something you shouldn't remember. You close your eyes. You try to sleep. But your mind won't stop. It replays things. A street lamp, the smell of detergent, music, screens, Names, color, warmth, and then your brain shifts, pushes it away, bury it, like the rest. When you wake, there's frost on your eyebrows. Your breath curls into the air like steam. You're not dead. That's the first thought. Then comes the second, what now? No task yet. No orders. You wander, slowly, carefully, trying not to attract attention. But attention finds you. A woman calls you by a name that isn't yours. You don't correct her. You answer. She gives you a basket. Deliver this, she says, to the midwife. You nod. You take it. You walk. Inside the basket are linens, herbs, a wet cloth, and something else. Blood. You don't ask. You just move. You find the midwife's home. You knock. She opens the door without looking, takes the basket, closes it, doesn't thank you. That's fine. You didn't expect it. You turn to leave, but a child blocks your path. Barefoot, thin, eyes like wells. Do you believe in angels? He asks. You freeze. He shouldn't be speaking to you. You're no one. You're worse than no one. You look at him. You shake your head. No. He nods. Me neither. And then he walks away. You don't follow. You don't ask what he meant. You just leave. Because here, words are dangerous. Curiosity is a sin. Questions are a liability. You return to the square. The steward finds you. Mill, he says. They need hands. And that's all it takes. You walk, you enter, and the noise hits you like a wave. Grinding stone, screaming wood, dust in the air so thick you can't breathe. You are handed a sack. Lift. So you lift. Move. So you move. Over and over. Wheat, barley, rye. You don't know what you're carrying. You don't ask. You just obey. The man beside you collapses. No one helps. You don't either. You step around him. You keep going. Because this place does not stop. For anything. For anyone. When the sun dips low, you're released. Not dismissed, not thanked, just released. Like a dog untied. You find the granary again, your corner, your stone, your rats. You sit. You scratch the dried blood from your knuckles. You lick your lips. You whisper again. That name, yours. Just to hear it. Just to remind yourself. You exist. You are still here. And you begin to count the days. Not because they matter, but because you're afraid if you stop, you'll disappear. You lose count on the 10th day. Maybe the 11th. It doesn't matter anymore. The light, the cold, the tasks, they blur together like smoke, like fog over the river in the early morning when the sun hasn't quite decided to rise and the world holds its breath, waiting for someone to move first. But no one does. Because no one ever wants to be the first to break the silence. You wake before the bells, not because you want to, because your body has learned the rhythm. You stretch and every muscle stings like it's been whipped. Your mouth tastes like ash. Your fingernails are black with something you can't name anymore. You've stopped noticing the stench on your skin. You've stopped flinching when dogs growl. You've stopped caring when children point or whisper. Today, you are sent to the church, not inside. Of course not. The church is not for you. You are sent to clean the ossuary, the place where bones are kept, when graves are too full or too shallow or too needed for newer bodies. The priest hands you a bundle of rags, a wooden bowl, a bucket of vinegar. Do not drop anything. That's all he says. Then he leaves. The building is small, cold, dark even in daylight. The door groans when it opens. Inside shelves, stacks, skulls, ribs, femurs, jaws, hundreds, thousands, and each one had a name once. A story, a family, a moment of breath. Now just bone, just shape. You begin. Wiping, rubbing, stacking. The vinegar stings your nose. The dust coats your mouth. But the worst part isn't the smell. It's the silence. The overwhelming, crushing silence of the dead. You try not to look into the eyes of the skulls, but you fail. Some are cracked, some still have tufts of hair. Some look like they were screaming when they died. You keep working, because what else is there? But then you find one, smaller than the others. A child, maybe 5 years old. The teeth haven't fully come in. The jaw is broken. You stop, just for a second. And in that second, you feel the world tilt. The weight of it all, the horror, the futility. You look around. Thousands, maybe more. All forgotten, all stacked, labeled by number, not name. And you know this is your future, if you're lucky. If you die with enough bones left to stack, you finish the child's skull last. You wipe it clean. You place it on the shelf. And you whisper, not a prayer, just a word. Sorry. You don't know why. You just do. And the silence seems to hold it. Just for a moment. You step outside. The light blinds you. The wind bites. The priest gives you bread. Stale, dry, but food. You thank him. He nods. Says nothing. You walk away. You chew. Slowly, letting the crumbs soften in your mouth. And then you hear it. A scream. Sharp. Sudden. A woman. You run, without thinking, toward the sound. It comes from the market square. A boy young, no older than 10, has been caught stealing. An apple. 1. The crowd gathers fast. They surround him. The guards come. He's crying. He says he was hungry, that his mother is sick, that he hasn't eaten in 2 days. It doesn't matter. They drag him to the post. They tie his hands. They whip him. Once, twice, 10 times. Blood runs down his back. You spend the next day hauling rocks for the wall around the mill. The work is brutal. The stones are sharp. Your hands bleed again. The overseer hits you with a stick when you slow down. You don't react. You don't even look at him. That night, you don't sleep. You sit with your back against the barn wall, knees pulled in, listening to the rats move through the hay. You think about the skull, the child, the whip, the apple, the scream, the old man. You think about how fast this place consumes people, how easy it is to vanish, and you wonder how many have vanished before you, and how many will come after. The next morning, the fog is thick, too thick. You can't see more than a few steps ahead. People walk slowly, cautiously. Someone slips on a frozen patch, breaks their arm, screams. No one stops. The healer is gone, or dead, or drunk. No one knows. You are sent to the woodpile today, to split logs. The axe is dull. The ground is slick. Your hands are raw, but you chop, again and again, until your arms shake, until your vision blurs, and you think this is what your life is now. Wood, bone, waste, silence. You are not a person anymore. You are a tool, a moving part, and even that only if they let you be. You finish before dusk. You return to your spot. Your cloak is thinner now. Your boots have holes. You wrap your feet in straw. You sleep. You dream of fire, not warm, destructive, hungry. You wake to the sound of bells, not the usual ones. These are fast, urgent. You rise. You run. People gather at the church. Smoke. A fire. Someone's home has caught. Flames rise high into the sky. People shout. Buckets. Water. You help. You don't think. You pass the water. You shout. You run. The fire eats the roof. Then the walls. Then the barn beside it. The cows burn. Screaming. The wood crackles. Someone falls. You drag them out. Burned, but alive. You keep going. Hours pass. The fire finally dies. Nothing left. Ash. Steam. Smoke. The priest gathers the people. He speaks of sin, of punishment, of pride. He says the fire was a warning, that someone among them has brought darkness. He doesn't say who, but his eyes search, and they stop. On you, you do not move, you do not speak. The priest's eyes rest on you for only a second, but it is enough. Enough to brand your shape into the minds of the villagers. enough to twist the silence around you into suspicion. You are still, not out of discipline, but out of instinct. Because here, movement can be mistaken for guilt. A twitch can become confession. A glance can become evidence. And so you breathe slowly, shallowly. You lower your gaze, not out of shame but strategy. The priest continues. His voice rises louder, sharper, filled with that particular authority born not of truth but of fear. He speaks of divine wrath, of moral rot, of hidden sin festering beneath thatched roofs. The crowd shifts, eyes dart. Murmurs ripple through the air like insects before a storm. Someone whispers something, a name. You can't hear it, but you know it isn't yours, not yet. The priest finishes with a call for repentance, not to him but to the village, to the gods, to the wind. He leaves. The people remain. They linger, staring into the charred remains of what used to be someone's life. A home, a barn, a cradle, a memory, gone. You back away, slowly, like an animal that knows the trap hasn't closed yet, but it will. You walk the long way back to your spot, past the well, past the bakery, past the wall where someone's blood still stains the stone from a punishment last week. You sit, not to rest, but to think, what now? You've done nothing wrong. But here that doesn't matter. Wrongness is decided, chosen, needed. Especially in moments like this, the village needs someone to blame, to sacrifice, to cleanse the smoke from their lungs. You eat nothing that night, not because there's no food, but because your stomach has knotted into something unrecognizable. Your dreams come fast, violent, a rope, a torch, a scream that doesn't stop. You wake before dawn. You wash your face with melted snow. You brush dirt from your clothes. You tie your hair back tighter. You tell yourself, be invisible, be useful, be quiet. The steward assigns you to the fields. You nod, grateful. Distance is safety. The walk is long. The air is bitter. Your fingers go numb before you arrive, but you welcome it. The cold is better than fire, the wind better than whispers. You rake, you turn soil, you haul sacks of seed. The work is endless, but it's work, and work is proof that you are needed, that you are not idle, that you are not the reason for the smoke. Others toil beside you. One man spits blood every few minutes. No one asks why. A woman hums as she works, off-key, repetitive. Her voice is flat. Her eyes are gone. Hours pass. You stop feeling your hands. You keep moving anyway. Midday brings no food, just rest. If you can call it that. You sit on a stump. You breathe into your hands. You think of water, of bread, of a blanket. It doesn't itch. Then you stop. Because comfort is a threat. Hope is weakness. Afternoon comes. You are called back early. The steward waits, his expression unreadable. He points. The chapel. You blink. He doesn't explain. You walk, slowly, each step heavier than the last. The chapel is dark. Candles flicker. Shadows dance on the walls. The priest stands by the altar, alone. He gestures. You approach. He doesn't smile. You were seen near the fire, he says. You say nothing. Helping, running, touching things that didn't belong to you. You nod. You don't lie. We give thanks for your aid, he says. But some say they saw more. You say, I only passed water. I saved a man. He watches you, long, hard. We live in strange times, he says. The devil moves quietly. He enters through cracks, through good intentions, through silence. You understand the test. He wants you to name someone, anyone, to prove your loyalty. You say nothing. He waits, then nods. Go. That's all. You leave, confused, relieved, terrified, because you know this isn't over. Not yet. The air outside tastes wrong. You walk faster. Someone bumps your shoulder. Doesn't apologize. A boy throws a rock. doesn't miss. You do not stop. You do not speak. That night, you do not return to the granary. Too visible. You sleep near the river, under the collapsed fence where no one goes. The wind howls. You bury yourself in straw. You dream of flames. Again. But this time, your hands are holding the torch. You wake sobbing, silent. The river is gray, frozen at the edges. You wash your face. You return to work before the sun rises. The steward looks at you. He doesn't speak. You are given no task. You wander, pretending to carry things, to belong. You overhear voices. They speak of new rules, of tighter scrutiny, of the need to purge impurity. Someone says your name, the wrong way, but close enough. Your skin turns to ice. You leave. You go to the church. You offer to clean. The priest allows it. You scrub floors. You polish wood. You whisper apologies to no one. At night, you sleep beneath the altar. The stone is cold, but the walls keep out the wind. For now. The next day, nothing happens. No accusation, no summons, no rope. You breathe, but not relief. Only endurance. You work harder, speak less, sleep lighter. And in time, they stop looking. They stop speaking. They forget. Almost. But you don't. You remember every glance, every whisper, every time you almost vanished. And you learn the truth. This is what survival looks like here. Not courage, not strength, but stillness, caution, disappearance. You are not alive. You are tolerated. And that here is everything. The days stretch longer now, not because the sun lingers, but because your perception has warped. Time has ceased to function in the way it once did. Hours are no longer markers of progression, but weights dragging you through the mud of repetition. Morning, noon, dusk, night, they all taste the same now. Like ash, like old bread. Like the inside of a wooden cup left too long in stagnant water. You no longer ask what day it is. You don't care. No one does. The village exists in cycles. Work, silence, punishment, shadows, whispers, smoke, work again. You wake with the frost still biting your cheeks. The chapel floor is harder than you remember, or maybe your body is just softer, more bruised, more hollow. You sit up, joints cracking like sticks underfoot. You pull your cloak tighter, though it doesn't help. The cold is not around you, it's in you now, part of your bones, part of your blood. The priest has not returned, the church is yours. For a moment, you stand, light a candle, and begin to sweep the stone. Not out of duty, but because stillness is dangerous. Stillness invites thought. Thought invites memory. And memory is a blade you cannot afford to hold. You finish the sweeping. You polish the door hinges with old cloth. You rearrange the candles in their holders. You breathe through your mouth. You leave before anyone else arrives. Outside, the fog is thick again. You move like a shadow, avoiding the square, the well, the forge. You take the long way toward the granary, not because you need to go there, but because it's movement. Movement is survival. You pass the old butcher's shed. A dog follows you for a while, limping, covered in sores. It looks at you as if it remembers something. Then it turns and vanishes into the mist. You stop by the woodpile. No one is there. You sit, just for a moment. Then you hear footsteps. Two men, talking loudly. One says something about the chapel. The other laughs. The laughter is sharp, mean. He cleans God's house but reeks of sin, the first says. You shrink into your cloak. You do not respond. You wait until they're gone. Then you get up. You walk to the back of the mill. There's always work there, even if no one says so. You find a pile of wet grain that's gone moldy. You begin to scrape it up. No one asks you to, but no one stops you either. That's enough. The smell clings to your hands, your sleeves, your mouth. You swallow bile and keep scraping. Your fingernails begin to peel. You press on. A child walks by, drops a stone at your feet, looks you in the eye. doesn't blink, then walks on. You do not speak. You do not react. Later, someone brings bread, a crust, hard as bone. You eat it, gratefully. You cut your gum on the edge. You taste blood. You keep chewing. The blood helps, softens the bread. Midday comes. The sun breaks through the fog for a few minutes. The light stings your eyes. You blink until tears come. You hide your face. Someone might think you're weeping. Someone might ask why. They mustn't. You move to the animal pens. Shovel waste. Spread straw. Swat flies. You work until your arms go numb. Your back locks. Your mind drifts. You see images that don't belong here. Plastic chairs. The hum of electricity. Glass buildings. Music through speakers. Your own name on a screen. You force them away. Too dangerous. Too bright. They will only burn you now. You slip while hauling a sack of feed. Your knee strikes a stone. You do not cry out. You grit your teeth. You stand, limping. The man in charge does not look up. Good. You finish the task. You limp to the trough. You drink the same water as the animals. It is warm, algae-coated, but wet. You drink deeply and feel it slosh in your hollow belly like an insult. Evening comes. You walk toward the edge of the village. You find an old crate. You sit. You lean your head back. You stare at the sky. No stars tonight. Only cloud. Only smoke. Only the echo of something that used to be beauty. You hum, quietly. A tune with no words. No melody. Just vibration. Just noise to fill the ache. Someone approaches. A woman. She sits beside you. Says nothing. Her hair is braided. Her hands covered in flour. She offers you half a carrot. You take it. You nod. She doesn't smile. She just sits. A full hour passes. Neither of you speak. Then she stands, walks away, leaves the other half on the crate. You save it. For later. Or for never. Night comes. You sleep in the old chicken shed. It smells. But it's covered. And warmer than stone. A rat scurries across your legs. You do not flinch. You close your eyes. You dream of the carrot. You dream of the woman's hands. You dream of something growing in soil that isn't poisoned. When you wake, it's still dark. You leave before anyone sees you. You walk to the path that leads out of the village. You stand there, just for a moment, just to look, just to imagine. You take one step forward, then stop. You turn back, because you know there is nowhere else. There is no outside. Not anymore. The path leads only to snow, to trees, to wolves, and you are too slow, too thin, too noticed. You return, as always. The steward finds you later, assigns you to the riverbank, washing linens. You kneel. You scrub. The cold water eats your fingers. You lose sensation, but you keep scrubbing. The blood doesn't always come out. Some stains are older than the cloth. You wring it anyway. Lay it on stone. Begin again. A boy approaches. Why don't you speak? He asks. You look at him. Because no one wants to hear me. He frowns. I would. You say nothing. He shrugs. Walks away. You keep washing. Because work is proof. And proof is safety. A storm comes that night. Wind howls through the village. Roofs rattle. Doors slam. Trees break. You stay in the chapel. Behind the altar. Candles flicker. Rain seeps through the cracks. You shiver. But you sleep. Because exhaustion is heavier than fear. When morning comes, a roof has collapsed. A child was inside. Not dead, but broken. They carry her to the healer. She's unconscious. The mother screams. You watch from a distance. The priest gathers the people again. This time, no sermon, just blame. Someone had weakened the beams. Someone had cursed the child. Someone unseen. The crowd looks around. Eyes settle. Not just on you, on others. Anyone quiet. Anyone poor. Anyone odd. The mood shifts. The village is turning. You feel it, like rot under a floorboard. And you know something is coming. You retreat to the forest's edge, just for an hour. Just to breathe. You find a clearing. You sit. You scream. Not loudly, not madly, just once, a sound that feels like ripping paper. Then silence, then breath. Then you return, because you must. Because here, silence is armor, and invisibility is the only kind of power you have left. You return to the village as the bells begin to ring, their dull iron clang spreading through the damp morning like a warning draped in ceremony, slow and rhythmic like a dying heart. And with every beat, your chest tightens. Because the air feels different now, not colder, not thicker, just heavier. As if it's made of consequence. As if it knows something you don't. And the looks you get as you walk back through the narrow, mud-lined paths confirm it. The way the butcher's wife turns her face slightly. The way the old man at the well stops dry, being water mid-pull, and lets the buckets splash back. The way the dogs stop barking and simply watch. As though they understand more than they should, and you keep walking, slower now, purposeful, careful not to meet anyone's eyes. Because today, eyes are dangerous, questions are dangerous, even curiosity is a blade. And you don't want to bleed, not again, not in front of them, not in the way that cannot be cleaned with cloth and ash. You reach the granary and wait, no one assigns you a task. Not yet. They're waiting too. Waiting for something to happen. And it does. Not with a cry, not with a crash, but with silence the priest appears, surrounded by 3 men in brown coats, hands clasped, walking slow. A procession of implication, and they stop in the center of the square, where the cobblestones are cracked and moss has grown into the lines like veins beneath skin, and the priest raises his hand not high, just enough to hush the breath of those near him, and he begins to speak. Not to shout, not to warn, just to speak. And his voice coils around the gathered like smoke from wet wood, heavy and unwelcome. The spirits have spoken. He says, "A root has been found sour, rotted, tangled in the foundation of our peace." The crowd stiffens, breathes in sync, like a single beast unsure if it is about to be fed or butchered. And he continues, "Not a witch," he says, "not this time. And that's new, that's worse, because witches can be burned, and burning ends, but rot? Rot spreads, rot stays, rot must be carved out. And you feel something shift in your gut, not fear, not yet, but certainty. The knowledge that this sermon is not about belief, it's about balance, about pressure building and needing a release. And someone will be chosen, not for guilt, not for sin, but for narrative, for cohesion, for the survival of the group at the cost of the individual. And then your name is said not loudly, not with accusation. Just said, a word placed in air like a stone dropped into water, and the ripples begin instantly. People turn, not all at once, but in sequence, as though rehearsed, as though they always suspected but were waiting for permission. And you do not run, because running means guilt, means confession, means that everything they've imagined must be true. So you stand, still, silent, face lowered, and wait for the hands. And they come, not cruel at first, just firm, practical. A farmer grabs your arm. A boy takes your elbow. And you walk, not dragged, not pushed, just moved, carried by communal intention more than force, to the church steps where the priest waits, and he looks at you with a face carved from pity and strategy, and he asks, "Do you deny it?" And you want to laugh because he hasn't said what it is, and yet denial would only confuse them. Resistance would only inflame them, and silence is expected. So you give it willingly, the same way you've given your days, your labor, your name, yourself. He nods as if that answers something, as if it confirms something deep and sacred. And they tie your hands, not tightly, not brutally, just enough to make it symbolic, and lead you into the chapel where you spent your nights, where you cleaned the floors, where you whispered to the altar when no one listened. And they sit you in the center, surrounded by flickering candles and uneasy shadows, and the priest speaks to them, not to you, about endurance, about danger, about how sin wears the face of the humble, the quiet, the helpful, and you sit still, staring at the stained glass that glows blue and red with morning light, and you think about the child's skull in the ossuary, about the old man who said, "You might live," about the girl who offered a carrot and never spoke again, and the priest asks you again, "Do you confess?" And this time you speak just one word. No, and it's not a plea, it's not defiance, it's just a breath made audible. And he nods again, rehearsed, pleased, because now they can act, now they can choose, now they can purge. But not yet. No execution. Not yet. First there will be trial, by ordeal, by water, of course. Because nothing is more fair than letting the river decide. They say if you float, you're guilty, if you sink, you're innocent, and they forget to add that the innocent drown, that the dead are always declared pure, and so they take you, hours later, to the riverbank, the same river where you once washed linens with your cracked hands and bleeding knuckles, the same river you once drank from after feeding animals. Now it will be your judge, your jury. They bind your arms with rope, thick and wet. They tie your ankles together. Someone murmurs a prayer. Someone else spits into the grass. And they carry you to the edge where the current pulses slow and thick like honey mixed with blood. And they lower you, not throw, just lower, until your body floats for a moment, then rolls, and the cold wraps around your chest like chains, and you sink fast. Because your bones are tired, your lungs small, your flesh heavy with days of starvation, and the sound of the world fades into water, and for a moment there is peace, there is nothing, there is quiet. And then you are pulled out, half dead, coughing, retching, your chest convulsing. Someone shouts innocent, someone else mutters lucky. The priest frowns but nods because the ritual has been fulfilled. The crowd satisfied, and now they must let you go? Not because they believe you, but because to kill you now would break the rules they pretend to follow. And so you are left, wet, shaking, alone on the grass as they walk away back to their homes, their stoves, their safety, and you lie there for what feels like days, staring at the sky as if waiting for it to fall. And when you finally stand, bones aching, breath shallow, you know something has changed, not in them, but in you, because now you are truly invisible, not ignored, not feared, just unspoken, erased, and that is worse than death, because you are still here, still moving, still remembering, and no one else ever will. You survive, but the word no longer means what it once did. It does not mean life, or luck, or strength. It means continued motion. It means the absence of death. It means breath without voice, presence without acknowledgement. It means walking through the village like smoke drifting between stones, untouchable, unwanted, unnoticed, and yet always there. You survive in the corners, in the gaps between the day's labor and the night's rituals. You are not given work anymore, but you still work, quietly. Instinctively, you fix what is broken before they see it. Sweep what is dirty before they notice. You are a ghost with calloused hands, and though no one thanks you, no one stops you either. And that, in itself, is mercy. Or at least the closest thing to it you can afford. Days pass without language, without eye contact, without names. You forget what your own voice sounds like. You begin to wonder if it was ever real, if you truly had another life before this one. Or if that was just a long, soft dream before the hard world took shape. But there are reminders, still, small ones, dangerous ones, like the color of a berry that grows near the fence, too bright for this century, too unnatural, or the way the breeze sometimes smells like plastic and metal and old soap, or the face of a child that resembles someone you used to know. You bury these thoughts deep, because to dwell on them is to court madness, or worse, to court hope, and hope here is a poison that kills slower than starvation but deeper, more thoroughly. You sleep now in the abandoned corner of the tannery, The smell keeps most people away, which makes it safe. You've grown used to it. Your senses have adapted, dulled, evolved, your hearing sharper, your vision more narrow, your stomach smaller, your steps softer. You are becoming something else, something fit for this place, this age, this silence. One morning, you wake to footsteps outside the wall, fast, light, deliberate. You do not move. You do not breathe. And then a voice, female, low, urgent. Are you alive in there? You hesitate. Your heart flutters like a trapped bird. Because no one speaks to you. No one dares. And yet here she is, breaking the rules with 6 words. You crawl to the crack in the stone and whisper, yes. It's the first word you've spoken in 5 days. It sounds foreign, like borrowed cloth. She exhales, a sound of relief and calculation. Don't move. She says, I'll be back, and then she's gone. Just like that. Just whined in boots and gone. You wait, an hour, 2, the whole day, nothing. And then that night, while you're pretending to sleep with your back to the wall and your ears alert, she returns. She doesn't knock, doesn't call. She just slides something through the gap in the wood. A cloth bundle, warm. When you unwrap it, inside is food, not scraps, not spoiled, real food, roasted meat, onions, something baked and spiced and wrong in its kindness. You eat slowly, crying without sound, and sleep for the first time without shaking. The next morning, nothing happens, no accusations, no one searches, no one speaks of it, and that means she's good, she's careful, she's dangerous, and maybe that's why she comes again. 3 nights same time, same silence. This time she whispers, you were right not to speak. And you whisper back, why are you helping me? And she replies, because you're what happens when they run out of excuses. And that sits in your chest like a hot coal, because you know it's true. You've become the excess, the leftover, the cost of their peace, and for some reason she doesn't fear you for it. She returns again, and again, not often, just enough to remind you that not all voices have turned against you, just enough to keep you from rotting, just enough to keep you dangerous. She gives you a name, hers, not yours, and it feels like a relic, like something from a better world. Her name is Ellen. No title, no origin, just Ellen, and it fits the way she moves, the way she appears and vanishes like a breath you weren't ready for. She doesn't ask your name, and that's good, because you've almost forgotten it. She teaches you things: how to sharpen bone into blades, how to read the animal tracks by the river, how to listen to the way the crows call before it rains. These things are not kindness, they are survival. And you are grateful, because the time is coming, you can feel it. The priest's sermons are changing, less about sin and more about purity, less about the devil and more about bloodlines, about unity, about cleansing. And that's worse, much worse, because unity is always hungry, always carving itself into shape with other people's bones. Ellen tells you that there are others like you, not many, scattered, hiding in the hills, in the burned-out ruins of old towers, in the caves where the wolves once lived. She says they are waiting, building, preparing for the purge that must come before the thaw. You ask her what she means, and she only says, when it begins, don't wait for the fire. And she disappears again, this time for longer. Days pass, the food runs out, your skin grows tighter on your ribs, and then one night you hear the bell ring twice, then a pause. Then once again. That's the signal, she said. You don't think you run, barefoot, silent, through mud and frost and splinters, past the chapel, past the river, into the trees, and behind you the shouting begins, torches flicker. The smell of oil and fear and hatred rises like smoke. They are burning something, someone. Again, you do not look, because looking will only slow you down. You move like wind, like prey, like consequence. And by dawn, you find the hollow she told you about, carved in the side of a hill, hidden behind dead branches and old stones. Inside are 2 others, hollow-eyed, silent. They do not ask who you are, they recognize you. Not your face, but your silence, your stillness, your survival. They make room. You sleep. And when you wake, you are still alive, still breathing, still forgotten, but not alone. The hollow is cold, but not cruel. Damp, but not dangerous. Quiet, in a way that feels deliberate. Like the earth itself has chosen silence over spectacle. And you lie on your side listening to the breath of the others, two survivors, like you. Though that word doesn't fit anymore. Not really, because survival implies movement through a storm. And this storm doesn't end. It just shifts, takes new shapes, speaks in new voices, and you begin to understand that what you've done isn't survival. It's transformation. You've changed in ways no one can see, but you feel it in your bones, in the way you no longer flinch when a branch snaps nearby, in the way you no longer dream of escape, but only of endurance. One of the others is older, his beard is patchy, and his teeth are gone, but his eyes are sharp, alert, too alert, as if they've seen too much to ever close fully again. The second is a girl, younger than you remember being, maybe 14, maybe less. Her hands are wrapped in cloth, burned or cut or worse. She does not speak, not once, not even when she sleeps. And when she looks at you, it's with the gaze of someone who's already died once and came back unfinished. You share food, roots mostly, bitter things that grow in the cracks of the stone. Ellen returns after 2 days, her coat soaked in mud, her face streaked with smoke and something darker. She doesn't speak at first, just drops her bag, unfolds a map made of animal hide and blood markings, and points to 3 places: Rounds, towers, broken mills. She says they're safe for now. She says the village is burning, not from outsiders, not from war, but from itself. The priest declared a second cleansing, and this time no one was spared. Old, young, sick, silent, it didn't matter. They pulled people from their beds, from their cellars, from the roots of their prayers, and the river ran red for a whole day. They say red with justice. Ellen doesn't cry, she doesn't tremble, she speaks like a ledger, like someone reciting a list of costs. And you listen not with horror, but with recognition. Because you knew this was coming. She looks at the girl with the wrapped hands and says, "You were right to run." Then to the man, "You waited too long." Then to you, "Your choice will come soon." And the words linger, not like a warning, but like something heavier in the air. She outlines the plan, not defiance, not revenge, but a kind of survival sharpened by years of silence, a quiet kind that adapts, that listens better, that moves with the world instead of against it. She says the old patterns are falling apart. That fear is now echoing back to its makers. Even the priest walks differently now. One of his companions was found near the forge, still and silent, a sign left nearby unreadable, unknown. And so, they speak in riddles. They blame the wind, the past, the sky, anything but what truly changed. Ellen gives you a small blade not for use, but for readiness, and says, "You don't have to fight, you just have to know how to leave." You nod, because now, that's what you've become. Not a warrior, not a speaker, just movement, a shape, a shadow. That night, you leave the hollow, not by order, but because the earth itself feels different. You walk northeast toward the remains of a tower. Ellen told you someone lives there. A person who remembers the old ways, not for healing but for hiding. 3 days later, the ruins greet you. Wind, stone, a tree that looks out of place, and a bird watching you like it knows. A voice speaks, rough, low. You arrived late, it says. You turn. A man with one eye stands holding a bundle of dried leaves. "Ellen sent you," he adds. You nod. He doesn't invite, just gestures. You follow. The tower has nothing above, but beneath tunnels, rooms, stacks of old papers, shelves of preserved plants strung like decorations. He teaches you quietly, not lessons of battle, but lessons of presence. How to move unnoticed. How to confuse the nose of a hunting dog. How to listen to ground instead of voices. He speaks names from before these hills had owners. You don't question. You learn them not out of interest, but because your mind has space again. For something more than waiting. He shows you a journal leather-bound, pages covered in symbols that seem to shift. Truths no one believes anymore, he says, which makes them powerful. He asks if you dream. You say no, because your dreams aren't stories, they're fragments of something that no longer fits. Metal doors, bright windows, strange food, and names you once answered to. He nods. He already knew. Days pass. The girl returns, her hands wrapped gently. She doesn't speak, but the old man glances at her and says, "You left it all behind, didn't you?" She nods once. He says no more. Some choices don't need explanations. You begin marking lines, not letters, not language, just movement captured in symbols. It feels familiar, like memory in shape. Ellen returns one evening. She's thinner, focused, something new in her eyes. She says the village is gone. Quiet now. Nothing remains. No one left. The leader vanished. No trace. She says others are gathering in the marshlands. But not for war. For something older. Less controlled. More like instinct. You understand. There will be no banners. No loud declarations. Just fog and footsteps. And the kind of silence that carries meaning. They don't want old rules anymore, she says. Not even new ones. They want to choose for themselves. And maybe something new will be born. Maybe it will be hope. Maybe not. But it will happen. And you'll need to choose where you stand. You nod, but inside you're still quiet. That night, you sleep inside the tower. Ellen nearby. The girl, the old man. And in your dream, there is a song. Not words, just sound. Deep and slow. So strong it changes the walls. When you wake, the air feels different. Not smoky, but full. The start of something. Morning arrives, but it's not peaceful. It's the kind of morning that holds a breath, waiting. The kind where nothing stirs. Not the branches, not the birds. Even the smallest creatures seem to pause. You feel it before you see it. A weight in your chest. Not fear, not memory, just presence. You sit up in the lower part of the tower, wrapped in a worn cloak that smells like time itself. The old man is already gone. The girl still sleeps, curled inward like something waiting to grow. You don't move. Not yet. You listen. Not for voices, but for patterns, the kind you don't hear with ears. A shift in the ground, a pull in the air, the trace of something on its way. You stand, slowly. Not with pain, but with the echo of yesterday. You step outside, into fog, and the world is gray, smeared like soot across parchment. You follow the path you memorized in fragments, past the hollow root, past the flat stone that bleeds when it rains, to the edge of the ridge where Ellen said they would gather, and they are there. Not many 12, maybe 13, figures wrapped in mismatched cloth, some armed, some broken, all silent. Ellen stands at the center, eyes red, jaw clenched, holding nothing but a bundle of twine and 3 bone tokens carved with symbols that burn your eyes if you stare too long. She raises her hand and speaks, not loudly, not like a leader, but like someone invoking something she does not fully understand. This is not a rebellion, she says. This is a reckoning. And no one nods, because they already know. Because this word has been sitting in their mouths for weeks, unswallowed, and now it finally has shape. She points toward the north, toward the hills where the new steward has built his camp, where rumors say the priest now serves a different power, one with no face but many voices. She says the time has come to choose stay and bury what remains of yourselves, or move and become the thing they fear most. Not soldiers, not ghosts, but reminders, proof that not everyone broke the same way. And then she looks at you, and the others follow her gaze. And suddenly you are not invisible anymore. You are center, you are focus. Not because you spoke, not because you led, but because you endured. Because you stood still while everything cracked around you and they saw it. Even when they pretended not to, you nod, slow, and say nothing. But Hélène smiles anyway, because silence is its own kind of vow. That night, you move together, the 13 of you, slipping through brush, under roots, across streams that steam even in the cold. You travel not as a unit, but as shadows chasing the same fire. The camp is farther than you thought. Larger too? Torches on tall poles, tents shaped like teeth, guards with polished boots and blank eyes, and at the center a structure of stone and bone and cloth, neither church nor hall, but something else. A place built not to worship, but to contain, and inside, they say, the priest writes now, not sermons, but instructions, blueprints for control, diagrams of punishment. Ellen points to the perimeter and divides the group, 3 here, 2 there. You and the girl with the wrapped hands are sent to the eastern edge, near the livestock pens, where the smoke from the cook fires hides your movements. You wait, heart steady, breath shallow, until the signal comes, not a sound, but a shape drawn in the sky with smoke and broken moonlight. And then everything happens at once, not chaos, not clarity, just movement, fires lit, guards silenced, robes coupées, voices raised, not in battle, but in memory, chanting old names, old crimes, dragging the past into the present with every shout. And you move, too, slipping between shadows, reaching the central structure. The girl with you finds the door and breaks the lock with a stone and a whispered curse. Inside, it is quiet, too quiet, and the air smells of ink and rot, of blood and wax and something floral and wrong. And you see him, the priest, older now, thinner, eyes sunk deep into a face that was once confident but is now carved by fear. He does not scream. He simply stares, as if waiting, and then says, "It was never about you." And you reply, "Finally, after so long, it was always about us." And then the girl steps forward and raises her wrapped hands and peels away the cloth to reveal not scars but symbols burned into her skin. Symbols that shine in the dark like warnings, like truths. And the priest begins to shake, and the room begins to shake with him, not from fear, but from something older, something deeper. The structure groans as if alive, as if tired of holding so many secrets. And outside you hear the chants grow louder, not angry, not joyful, just inevitable. You do not kill the priest. You do not need to. He begins to crumble before your eyes. Not bleeding, not collapsing, just unraveling, his form thinning, his words vanishing, until he is only breath. And then not even that, and the building settles, quiet, and you walk out with the girl hand in hand, not triumphant, not free, but whole. And that is something they can never take again. The others gather, some wounded, some weeping, some humming tunes too old for this age. And Ellen steps forward and says, "This land is not healed." And you all nod, because healing is not the goal. Survival was never the goal. What matters now is memory, is movement, is the refusal to forget what silence costs. The fires burn until dawn, and when the sun rises, it finds you not hiding, not running, but watching, ready, and unafraid. The fire left black teeth in the land where buildings once stood, where voices once echoed, where names were once whispered with love, or fear, or both. And though the ashes cooled in days, the heat of what you'd done stayed in your skin, in your lungs. It stayed even in your dreams, twisting them into spirals of falling stone and burning water and faces you both knew and didn't. You didn't return to the hollow, not because it wasn't safe, but because safe no longer meant still. You kept moving, east first, then south, through the river plains where fog lingered like breath held too long, where men carried axes not for trees but for proof of power. You saw villages untouched, but not unharmed. Places where the fear hadn't burned but festered, grown slow and thick beneath smiles. Where children no longer played at night and doors were never opened fully. And you passed through like smoke, like story, never staying long enough to be questioned. Never moving so fast as to be chased. The girl stayed with you, her hands always wrapped now in dark cloth, not to hide but to protect herself. Others, maybe even the past itself. Ellen vanished again, not with a farewell but with a nod, the kind that said, "You know what to do now." And you did, not in steps or words, but in instinct, in repetition. Each village became a map, each camp a pattern, each priest a symbol to be deciphered. Sometimes there were others, those like you, half forgotten, bruised but breathing. Some followed, most didn't, too afraid to leave what was killing them. You didn't blame them, not anymore, because survival isn't noble. It's lonely, and freedom isn't beautiful. It's sharp, jagged, bleeding with every choice you make. The old man had said once that every century has its ghost, and some ghosts wear skin. You began to understand that now, began to feel your body becoming something other than person, less defined, more myth. You didn't seek war, but war came. Not in lines of soldiers, but in caravans of hunger. Men from the coast pushing inland with banners made of teeth and iron, speaking of unity and mercy, while their hands bled from tightening rope. They didn't ask, they took. And when they took too much, the villages cried out, not to their gods, but to whatever still listened in the woods, in the wells, in the mouths of wandering survivors. And some of them heard your name, not the one you were born with, but the one the girl whispered once during sleep ash voice. They called you the one who walked through ruin and did not burn, the one who unmade the priest with silence, the one who brought reckoning. And with that name came power, and with power came attention. Men began to follow you. Not many, not loyal, but enough. Enough to make the wrong kind of noise. Enough to make you a target. And one night, under a sky cracked by distant thunder, they came, not villagers, not priests, something else. Men in dark robes, silent, organized, with masks of bark and leather stitched into the shape of human screams. They didn't speak. They didn't threaten. They simply surrounded your camp and waited. And when the fire died, they moved, like wolves, like wind. The fight wasn't fair, wasn't glorious. It was teeth and bone and mud. It was choking and stabbing, and eyes rolled back. You survived. Barely. So did the girl. Though one of her hands no longer moved right, bent at an angle that made you wince every time she reached for something, the others died, or vanished, or ran and never looked back. And in the silence after, you found a scroll tucked into one of the masked men's robes, sealed in wax shaped like a serpent eating its own tail. Inside were names yours, Ellen's, the girl's, and others you didn't recognize, marked not with death orders, but with symbols you now understood. Danger, disruption, echo. The church hadn't died. It had adapted, fragmented, turned into something harder to fight. Something that moved in shadows and whispered promises instead of commands. The scroll called it the thread in order, a movement, maybe even a god, you weren't sure. Only that it saw you, and that meant time was running thin. You moved again, faster now. Deeper into the east, where the land grows wild and flat, and the people don't name their seasons or their dead, where stories are passed in smoke rings and dance, and when they heard your name, they didn't fear you, they didn't worship you, they watched, they waited, they asked if you remembered the wind before the churches, the soil before the books, the gods before the priesthoods, and you didn't answer. But the girl did. In her way, she drew shapes in the dirt, in fire, in salt, and the elders nodded. They offered shelter, not protection, not alliance, just a place to sleep. And that was enough for a time, but even peace began to feel like a trap, like a pause you hadn't earned. And when Ellen returned, carrying a broken shield and a smile that bled at the edges, she said, "They're gathering again." And that was all it took. The fire inside you, small, slow, steady, began to rise again. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in certainty, because you had walked through too much silence to stop now, had swallowed too much smoke to ever forget the taste of flame. You gathered what you had: bone dagger, salt pouch, 3 tokens carved from ruined altar stone, and followed back into the heart of a world that didn't want you, but could no longer ignore you. They came not in the night, but in the hour before dawn. That thin sliver of time where the world feels unfinished, where color has not returned to the trees, and the air still smells like dreams. You were ready by then, not in formation, not with armor or ranks, but with understanding, with eyes that had seen too many endings to mistake one more for defeat. They moved like oil across stone fluid, heavy, inevitable, their masks different this time. Not bark or leather, but smooth, featureless clay, pale as bone, sculpted in the likeness of what they thought was godhood, faceless, timeless, merciless. You stood with Ellen on the rise above the ruins of an orchard. The girl beside you, her damaged hand wrapped tight in linen soaked in crushed nettles and ash. Below, the gathering was larger than anything you'd seen before. 20 villages worth. Survivors and believers and doubters alike. Some held blades, others held torches, some held nothing but their own shaking breath. Ellen raised her hand but did not speak, because words were useless now. The time for symbols had returned, and so she held aloft a piece of burnt cloth from the chapel, the one that burned in your dreams, and tore it in half, slowly, without rage, without triumph, and threw it to the wind. And the wind accepted it, carried it high and then far. And then the earth began to hum, not from magic, not from gods, but from feet, from heartbeats, from breath held too long and finally released. The thread soldiers descended like falling stars, quiet at first, methodical, and then sudden, erupting from the tree line with tools of silencing nets of thorn, stones carved with symbols meant to break memory, ropes soaked in sap that stung and numbed. But your people, if they could be called, that were not soft anymore. They had been tempered. Like old blades forgotten in rivers, like truths repeated in whispers until they become belief. The first wave fell quickly, not because they were weak, but because they expected fear, and fear had been burned away long ago. The second wave came harder, with fire, with poison, with the voice of the priest himself, his real voice, amplified through some unnatural device carved into the throat of a man twice his size. His words were old, familiar, promises of return, of peace, of the old order reassembled, reformed, perfected. And it almost worked. People paused, wavered, remembered, because memory is the sharpest weapon when used by those who wish to control. But then the girl stepped forward, pulled the wrappings from her hand, and placed her palm onto the earth, and the ground itself answered not with cracks or fire, but with silence. Sudden, immense, holy. Every bird stopped singing, every breath caught in lungs, every weapon lowered, just for a second. And that second was enough. You moved in that gap, not as a leader, not as a savior, but as proof. You slipped past the front lines through smoke and broken prayers, to the man with the device in his throat, and when he saw you, he laughed, not a sound of joy, but of certainty, and he said, "We wrote you," and you said, "Then you wrote the wrong ending," and you pulled the stone from your pouch, the one the old man gave you, and pressed it to his chest, and he crumpled like paper in rain, and the voice stopped, and the air returned, and your people roared, not with victory, but with release, with the kind of sound that comes after holding sorrow too long, after burying too many, after being forgotten too deeply. The soldiers of the thread broke, not because they were outnumbered, but because they finally saw themselves, saw the masks for what they were: weights, burdens, denials of the faces they'd once had. Some tore them off, some ran, some fell to their knees and wept without knowing why. Ellen moved through them like wind, not striking, not killing, just looking. And they parted for her like reeds for a river. The girl stood at the edge of the orchard ruins and raised her hand again, not to cast or command, but to remember. And the earth trembled, soft, rhythmic, like a heartbeat too large to measure. The fight was over, if it could be called a fight, and in its place was something worse and better, a reckoning not of blood, but of cognition. And when it ended, when the dust fell and the masks lay in piles like broken truths, Ellen turned to you and said, "This is not the end." And you said, "It never is." And she nodded and disappeared again, walking west this time. Where the mountains begin and the air turns thin and old, you stayed behind. Not to lead, not to rebuild, but to watch. To see what people do when the fire burns out and the dark doesn't come back. Some stayed and planted. Some wept and wandered. Some took the broken weapons and remade them into tools. And the girl carved symbols into the stone's slow, patient, shaping memory into monuments that could not speak but would not forget. And you wrote again, not for them, not for history, but for yourself. To remember that once you were hunted, once you were silenced, once you were forgotten, and now you were here, breathing still, walking still, dreaming still, and that was enough. The seasons changed not with ceremony, but with suggestion. The leaves didn't fall, they faded. The sky didn't shift, it thickened. The cold didn't arrive, it whispered its way into the soil, into the stone, into your bones, and you understood then that the world was not healing. It was remembering. The land had memory too, and it was waking slowly, cautiously, like a wounded animal unsure whether to flee or bite. You stayed near the orchard ruins for a while, not because it was safe, but because it no longer demanded anything of you. The others drifted in and out, carrying stories, offerings, sometimes just silence, and you listened. Not as a leader, but as a witness. And it felt right. The girl built cairns across the fields, small towers of balanced stone, each one carved with marks only she understood. Sometimes she'd sit for hours beside them, eyes closed, lips unmoving, as if waiting for them to speak back, and sometimes they did, not in words, but in the wind, in the way animals moved around them, in the dreams that followed after. You wrote too, not just marks now, but language again, hesitant at first, careful, trying not to trap truth in letters, but to sketch around it, to suggest without naming. You wrote of what came before, not the world you were born into, but the days after it cracked, the faces, the choices, the silence, and you buried the pages, not to hide them, but to feed the ground, let it eat your story, and grow something else, something new one day. A boy arrived, thin as a reed, with a voice that cracked like dry branches. He carried a pouch of salt and a question, "Are you the one who ended the thread?" And you didn't answer, not with words. You simply offered him water. And he understood, because ending is never one moment, never one person. It's a chain, a river, and he was part of it now. He stayed for a while, helped rebuild the forge, listened more than he spoke, and when he left, he took nothing with him but a single token, a shard of broken mask, worn smooth by time. The stories spread, not as legends, not as warnings, but as songs, quiet ones, sung in kitchens and fields, passed from mouth to mouth like recipes or riddles, and you began to hear your name in ways that weren't your name at all. Ash voice, mask breaker, the listener, and each one felt both true and false, like reflections in still water, distorted but sincere. Ellen returned once more, from the west, her hair silver now, eyes sharper than ever. She said nothing of where she'd gone, only sat with you beneath the black tree and shared a loaf of bitter bread. "They've begun to write again," she said. "Books, laws, lines in sand." And you asked, "Is that good?" And she laughed. Not cruelly, but with the weariness of someone who's seen too many cycles to pretend anymore. "It's what we do," she said. "Build and burn and build again." And you nodded, because hope wasn't a lie, it was a rhythm, and rhythm doesn't care if it's understood, only that it continues. The girl left one morning without a word, only a stone left in your palm. Smooth, black, etched with a spiral. It pulsed warm for a moment, then cooled. And you knew she wasn't gone, not really, just moving to where she was needed next. The orchard grew strange in spring, blossoms black as ink, bees that hummed low songs you could almost understand, And no one questioned it, not anymore. Magic had returned, not as spectacle, but as familiarity. The kind of magic that mends wounds without prayer, that turns grief into soil, that reminds you water remembers your name, and the past stopped chasing you. Not because it forgave you, but because it found new prey, new believers, new myths to mirror, and you walked again. Not to escape, not to search, but to be part of the rhythm, the cycle, the story that doesn't end, because some stories aren't meant to conclude, they are meant to echo. And you were an echo now, one that carried, one that changed the shape of the air just enough that those who heard it paused, breathed deeper, listened harder, and maybe, just maybe, remember who they were before the silence, before the fear, before the thread was ever spun. The hills bled gold at their peaks and bone at their roots, as if the land itself was rotting inward from centuries of burden it could no longer bear. The people called it the Bleeding Rise, though none remembered why. And those who asked were met with silence or laughter or warnings whispered through cracked teeth. You arrived there not seeking answers, but following a shape, a curve in the stories told by travelers, something incomplete in the lines they recited, like a lullaby missing its final note. And the closer you walked, the more the wind began to hum, not as sound, but as pressure, as if the sky leaned down to listen or press or warn. The roads weren't roads anymore, just impressions in stone and root and gravel where feet once dared to tread. The girl was gone. The boy had vanished east. Ellen had drifted like smoke, and you were alone again. Not in grief, but in function. Solitude became your clothing, your weapon, your witness, and when you stood at the ridge and looked down into the basin where the hills circled like old men in council, you saw something strange. Not a village, not a fortress, but a structure, a spire without base, a tower without walls. It floated above the earth as if pinned there by memory or refusal, and it pulsed slowly, like a dying breath stretched out to eternity. You did not approach it. Not at first. Instead, you waited, watching the land, noting its wounds, its scars, its moods, and slowly, patterns emerged, birds that flew in spirals before vanishing, trees that bled sap black as pitch, streams that reversed flow during moonrise, and you listened to them all, collected their sounds and silences, stored them in the place inside you where names once lived, and when you finally walked toward the spire, the land didn't resist its side, the way a house sighs when a long-lost child returns, not joyfully, but with recognition. And under your feet the soil felt hollow, layered, ancient, as if you stepped on pages not meant to be read. The closer you got, the more time forgot itself, days unraveled. Light stuttered, birds flew backward or not at all, and in your chest a pressure built, not pain but remembrance, a sensation that each breath brought not air but moments, your first wound, your last fire, the first time you saw the priest's eyes turn to dust, the first time you realized your voice could end worlds if spoken in the right key. You reached the base of the spire and found no door, no window, just stone smooth, dark, humming like bones beneath skin. And when you placed your hand upon it, the humming matched your pulse, and you understood that this was not a place built, but a place called, summoned by repetition, by grief, by belief turned inward until it became structure, and the spire began to speak. Not aloud, not in thought, but in echo. It repeated back the things you didn't say, the regrets, the doubts, the names you buried with your own hands. It told you truths you almost remembered and lies you wanted to believe. And in that moment you felt yourself thinning, not dying, but unraveling, being rewritten by memory that wasn't yours, but could have been. And you pulled away, breathless but whole, and sat in the dust, and wept not for the dead, not for the silence, but for the fact that you still remembered how to weep. And around you, the air shimmered, not with magic, but with attention. Something had noticed you, not as a threat, but as a variable, and you whispered, without knowing why, "I am not finished." and the spire pulsed once, low and deep and final, as if accepting your presence, but not your claim. And then the wind changed, it turned eastward, carried ash and salt and something faintly floral, and you stood and followed it, because movement was your inheritance now, your curse, your promise. And the hills watched you go, not with malice, but with memory, because they had seen many pass and few return, and you would not be one of them. You followed the wind until it turned south, into the hollowed forest where the trees grew in spirals, and their roots whispered your name in languages older than lungs. And there you met a woman made of smoke and feathers, who didn't ask your name but said, "I saw you in the bones," and offered you a cup carved from salt and filled with blood that wasn't blood but ink, and when you drank it, the world paused, and you saw every version of yourself you had not become: priest, killer, stone, God, and each one reached for you, and you said no, again and again, until the cup shattered, and the woman smiled and said, "Then you're ready," and led you deeper into the spiral, where the stars hung low and the air hummed the songs your mother never had time to teach you. And there you sat, not as a warrior, not as a myth, but as a vessel for something older than right or wrong. And the woman said, "They will come again, with new faces and old hungers." And you asked, "What do I do?" And she said, "The same thing you've always done, end what must end. Carry what must be remembered." And you didn't speak, you simply nodded, and the forest closed around you like a page turned too slowly, and the chapter continued. The stars pulsed like slow bruises across the sky, no longer fixed, no longer silent, as if the heavens themselves had begun to recall the shape of suffering. And in that forest spiral, under branches that didn't grow but reached, you walked beside the woman of smoke and feathers and said nothing, because to speak would be to name, and names were traps now, were roots too deep, were ropes tied to lives long since severed. She moved not with grace but with certainty, her limbs bending in ways bones shouldn't, her voice breaking once in every third word as though her truth arrived in fragments too wide to swallow. You followed because that's all you knew now. Follow the strange, follow the forgotten, follow the ache that pulls you deeper into the marrow of the world. And as you moved, the forest changed, not gradually, not gently, but violently. Trees cracked open to reveal altars, insects screamed hymns in unison, moss turned to faces that wept or watched or laughed until the laughter curdled into static. And then you reached it, a place not on maps, not in dreams, but in memory's underside. A clearing where time knelt, and in its center, a mirror, not polished, not flat, but warped like water that refused to be still. The woman gestured and said, "You must see," and vanished, her feathers scattering into the branches like snow on fire. And you stepped to the mirror and saw not yourself but every story ever told about you. The lies, the hopes, the failures refracted into symbols, into masks, into prayers you'd never spoken, but that had still drawn blood. You saw the priest again, his voice rotted now, his eyes blind with faith, his hand stretched towards something he could never hold. And you forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because you couldn't carry him anymore. And the mirror cracked. One line at first, then a web, then collapse. And behind the shards stood the girl, not the one you knew, but a version aged, weathered, with salt in her hair and stars in her teeth. And she said, "You chose correctly," and reached out her hand. And when you took it, your fingers burned with memory, not pain, just recognition. A reminder that nothing is ever truly lost, only misplaced in different skin. And she led you to a door that hadn't been there moments before, carved from bark and bone and lined with breath. And through it, a library not of books, but of rooms. Each room a story, each story a world. And the girl said, "This is the archive." And you knew it to be true because you felt yourself already beginning to fade. Not in fear, but in acceptance. The archive was not for the living, not for the dead, but for those who refused to be either. And as you walked its halls, doors opened not to places, but to moments. Your first word, your last kill, the night you almost let the forest take you, the day you broke the chain with your teeth and laughed like a god gone mad, and in each, a voice said, "Remember, not as command, but as invitation." And you did, and the more you remembered, the more the archive rebuilt you not in flesh, but in pattern, in rhythm, in promise. And when you reached the final hall, a chamber shaped like your own heart, beating once every 3 seconds, the girl stopped and said, "They're coming." And you asked, "Who?" And she said, "Everyone." And you sat and waited, because that's all you could do now. Wait for the world to find you again. Wait for the next hand to reach into the story and pull. And outside, the forest coiled. The stars flickered, and the spiral turned once more. You waited not as one waits for salvation or judgment, but as a stone waits for water without expectation, without fear, knowing that eventually everything comes back around. The girl sat beside you without a word, her presence no longer childlike or strange, but anchored. She belonged here in a way no one else could. Her breath matched the rhythm of the archive. Her gaze did not drift, and you realized then, she had never truly been following you, she had been leading you all along. Only backwards, only inside out. And as you sat in the silence that wasn't silent at all, filled with the hum of memories sliding along bone corridors, the pulse of stories waiting to be touched, the groan of history refusing to stay still, you began to hear them approach, first as a wind through the cracks, then as boots on stairless stone, then as names, not spoken, but felt, names you hadn't heard in years, names you thought buried beneath ash and war and betrayal. They came not as an army, but as a procession, figures wearing the faces of the past and the intentions of the present, each one carrying something that glowed, that sang, that remembered an item, a phrase, a wound, and they filed in, slow and deliberate, circling you like mourners at a funeral that had not yet been announced. And one by one, they knelt, not in worship, not in fear, but in recognition, as if to say, "We see what you've carried, and we carry it now too." And you wanted to speak, to tell them it wasn't yours anymore, but your voice had shifted, become part of the walls, of the floor, of the archive itself, and so you let them listen, because sometimes that is the only way to speak. The first was a woman with chains wrapped around her waist, each link etched with a different sin, and she placed the chains beside you and said, "I forgave myself yesterday." The second was a child with no eyes, only flame, and they said, "I see what the gods refused." The third was a man with a heart in his hand, still beating, and he whispered, "I gave it willingly." And on they came, 1,000 stories, 1,000 sorrows, 1,000 songs. And you wept again? Not because of the pain, but because of the enormity of it all, because you had believed yourself alone for so long, and now here they were, fragments of the same broken mirror, each shard choosing to reflect instead of cut. The girl stood then, and the archive shifted, its walls breathing in and out like lungs returning to life, and from above, a voice boomed, not loud, not cruel, but absolute, a voice that was not a voice, but a memory of thunder filtered through prayer. It said, "The thread is reborn," and the girl laughed, not with joy, but with defiance, and replied, "Then let it learn to unravel." And the sky cracked open above the spire, light falling not as beams, but as ribbons, as tendrils, touching each figure, each face, rewriting them not as weapons, but as seeds. And in that moment you saw it, not the future, not the end, but the choice, the forked road every soul must face, bind or bloom, repeat or reshape, survive or sanctify. And you stood, slowly, as if your bones remembered fire, and walked to the center of the room where the archive's heart beat louder than time itself, and you placed your hand upon it, and the stone grew warm, then hot, then unbearable, and then gone, and you were no longer there, not in body, not in skin, but in everything. You became story, not told but told through, not written but etched in the hesitation before a scream, in the pause before a lie, in the final breath before truth. You became the archive itself, not the keeper, not the key, but the silence between pages that makes meaning possible. And around the world, the forest listened, the rivers rewrote their courses, the stars adjusted their rhythms, and those who had forgotten began to remember not names, not dates, but feelings, colors, shadows that danced behind closed lids. And somewhere far from there, in a ruin long since buried, a boy picked up a stone that pulsed like a heartbeat and smiled and said, "It's time," and walked into a world that no longer needed to be saved, only remembered. And in that act, salvation was found anyway. And you who had once been a name, a blade, a silence, were now something more, something endless, something alive. They gathered beneath a sky that no longer turned, beneath stars that refused to blink, beneath a sun that hummed with hesitation but refused to rise. The world had entered a pause, not of time but of choice, and you, whatever remained of you, floated between the stories now, not as a ghost, not as a god, but as a suggestion, a sliver of understanding that brushed against the edges of minds ready to open. And those who listened began to feel it, not with their ears, but with their skin, with their scars, with their inherited silence. Far to the east, in a city that had no gates and no ruler, a woman awoke and found ink on her palms, symbols she had never learned but somehow remembered, and she wept, not from fear, but from recognition. Across the salt flats where no name remained, a man with a broken foot heard laughter in the wind and began to dance. Not because it healed him, but because it didn't matter anymore. In the mountains that grew backwards into the sky, a child was born with a single tooth made of stone. And when she opened her mouth to cry, the rivers below changed direction. And all across the shattered remains of the old empires, those who had once followed the thread began to gather, not with weapons, not with sermons, but with questions, with tremors in their ribs, with dreams they could not shake. And from those fragments, something stirred, not new, not old, but necessary. And you were there, always just behind the breath, just beneath the song. And then the archive itself shuddered, not in collapse, but in transformation. Its rooms folding into one another, its memories merging, the halls no longer endless, the stories no longer separate. And from the center where you once stood, where the stone once beat, rose a new form. Not human, not divine, but rhythm made flesh, memory given weight, a figure of impossible angles and intimate softness. And it spoke in a dozen voices, one of which had once been yours. And it said, "We begin again." And the world exhaled, not all at once, but in ripples, in pulses, as if the ground itself had been holding its breath since the first wound, since the first betrayal, and now, finally, dared to release. And the forests grew back, not as they were, but as they should have been, twisted and wise, welcoming and cruel, alive in ways too layered to name. The rivers ran clear, not because the poison had vanished, but because the people had learned to listen, to speak with their feet instead of their machines, to apologize with action instead of decree. And the stars, the stubborn stars, began to move again, slightly, subtly, as if testing the idea of forgiveness, of motion, of rhythm returned, and you watched all of it, not from above, not from within, but from somewhere between, where the archive now existed, not a place, not a building, but a decision made real, accessible only to those who had unlearned enough to ask without demanding. And slowly, the world reshaped, not through revolution, not through conquest, but through memory, through the soft power of remembering what was forgotten on purpose. And in the center of a dry lake bed, a girl drew a spiral into the dust, and around her, the wind paused, and in the next breath, she whispered a name that wasn't hers, and the ground trembled, and the archive listened, and the cycle turned once more. The spiral carved in dust did not fade with the wind, it deepened, as if the earth itself leaned forward to remember. The girl who traced it did not speak again, not because she was mute, but because her voice was already woven into the act, and those who stood around her, silent, waiting, uncertain, felt it in their teeth, in their fingertips, that something vast had turned its eye toward them, not with judgment, but with invitation, the kind that cannot be refused without consequence, the kind that sounds like a heartbeat but feels like a question. And across the waking world, others felt it too, in cities rebuilt with rusted metal and borrowed hope, in forests that had swallowed whole kingdoms and still hungered, in oceans that hummed with names no longer spoken. The spiral echoed not as symbol but as mechanism. It spun through the archive, now no longer hidden but breathed, now stitched into the corners of every dream, every echo, every story waiting to be finished. And those stories pulled themselves toward one another, merging, unbraiding, forming not answers, but shapes. The shapes of choices made and unmade, of losses mourned and forgotten and mourned again. And from these shapes came movement, not armies, not prophets, but wanderers, listeners, those who knew better than to command, who carried no flags, no relics, only fragments of songs and pockets of soil from lands they had never seen but still belonged to. And in their movement, the world began to synchronize, not with time but with tone, like instruments tuning to one another after centuries of static. And in that harmony, a new hunger grew, not for power, not for dominion, but for meaning. And meaning was a dangerous thing, because it asks always to be paid in truth. And the archive, this living rhythm of memory and rhythm, began to offer that truth, piece by piece, to those who could carry it, and each fragment came with weight, not as burden, but as gravity. And those who held them found their feet heavier, their steps slower, because they were no longer walking only for themselves. And among them rumors spread, stories of a figure who had once broken the thread, who had once sung silence into structure, who had once been not a hero but a hinge upon which the story turned. And though your name was never spoken, your presence was felt in the way fire curved around the careful, in the way wolves paused before paths once forbidden, in the way children dreamed of stars and spirals instead of straight lines. And you, wherever your echo now drifted, felt them too, those who walked with purpose, not given but found, those who did not need to be saved, only seen. And the archive expanded to meet them, reshaping itself with each new visitor, each new memory, sometimes a room of feathers, sometimes a hallway of keys, sometimes just a single door behind which nothing waited but reflection. And all of it pulsed with the slow certainty of a world finally willing to remember what it once refused to learn. And at the edge of the furthest horizon, where the sky met itself and folded inward like a breath too deep to hold, something else stirred. Not an enemy, not a return, but a question so old even the stars had forgotten it. And it whispered, not in fear, but in longing. What comes next? And the world, uncertain, unfinished, alive, began to answer, not with words, not with war, but with stories, spun from the dust, from the scars, from the softness that survives even after everything burns. The stories did not end when the last word was spoken. They folded inward, like fire returning to ash, like breath returning to soil, like memory returning to silence. And in their fading was not loss but fulfillment. Across the archive's vast and borderless rhythm, the final visitors arrived not with purpose but with presence, not to ask or to take, but simply to witness. And the walls welcomed them, no longer stone or echo, but something softer, like fabric that had learned how to hold light. And one by one they stood in the heart of the archive, now a place, now a pulse, now a pause, and closed their eyes, not to sleep, but to remember without effort, without pain. And in that remembering, the world was made whole again. Not perfect, not safe, but whole. As in known, as in chosen, as in alive. And somewhere within that living silence, you stood, or something like you, something that remembered you, carried your patterns, echoed your doubt, your decision, your defiance, and you watched as the spiral turned one final time, not to repeat, but to release. And the sky, that old and wounded sky, wept in color, and from its tears bloomed not flowers, but moments, moments so fragile. They had once shattered empires, and now they healed quietly, because they were finally seen, finally carried, not by kings or monsters or myths, but by people, ordinary and broken and whole and enough. And the girl, the one who had drawn the spiral in dust, grew old beneath it, her body folding like prayer, her hands stained with soil and ink. And when she died, the archive did not mourn. It sang, not in sorrow, but in rhythm, in the sound of one breath passed to another. And from that song came language, and from language came connection, and from connection came change, slow, stumbling, sacred. And in the centuries that followed, no one rebuilt the empires, no one crowned kings, no one burned libraries. Instead, they built small circles, homes that listened, paths that wandered, spaces that healed, and they told the stories not to warn, not to teach, but to remember. And remembering became a ritual, not of grief, but of continuity. And every year, when the spiral returned in the stars, they paused and they breathed, and they said your name not aloud, not as history, but as rhythm, as if to say, we are still listening. And the archive turned, and the spiral held, and the world remained imperfect, glorious, wounded, alive, and somewhere beyond the reach of sight, where stories go when they are no longer needed, but never lost, you smiled, not because it ended, but because it began.